Ken Adams. Welcome to this episode of the Valley View. I'm joined this week by State Representative Paul Evans. And Paul, you know, you've been in for one term now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, one term.
So how did your expectations find with reality?
Well, there's an old adage that my Chief Master Sergeant taught me that no plan survives initial contact. I think that's the best way to describe it. It was everything I thought it would be and more in terms of the challenges, the ups and the downs. The first session in 2015 was actually harder than the short session in 2016, and I think part of that's just learning the job. The other part is understanding how relationships work inside the building. But in 2016, I was actually able to help facilitate. I was co-chief sponsor on 3 bills. One about housing security, another one for small business development, which I was able to team up with Senator Boquist from the nearby area. And then the third was, quite frankly, a bill that I had been hoping to be a part of for many years, which was trying to get a set aside of the lottery for Veterans Outreach and Services, and I was able to help get that out of the building. So as far as how a term goes, learned a lot, made a few mistakes, hopefully learned from those mistakes, and looking forward to the future.
And you actually do fairly well in meeting people across the aisle, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that's beneficial when you can talk to the other side and come to agreements and like that. So, and you talked a bit about the veterans, and that's been kind of one of your focuses, but you're also working on Proposition 96.
Yes, Ballot Measure 96 is actually the Veterans bill. It is was a House Joint Resolution 202, and it requires a vote of the people because it's a constitutional change. But we actually had a unanimous vote out of the legislature to get it to the ballot. And it's a very simple bill. It puts 1.5% of the lottery aside for Veterans Outreach and Services. That equates to about $18 million, we think. And that money will be used for increasing the number of veteran service officers, the number of programs that can reach to military families, and in some cases, bridge programming to help make sure that some of those needs we've identified that aren't paid for by the federal government but are necessary to help vets complete school, get to work, get health care, get transportation, that we're able to do that. And the best part is that we've been able to demonstrate over the last several years that for every dollar of state investment in veterans outreach, we bring back at least $257 in federal services, federal direct services. So it's one of those things where the lottery was originally designed for economic development, and though this is a little bit of an abnormal definition of economic development, the federal government sets that money aside, and right now there are a little over 240,000 veterans living in Oregon that are not receiving anything, that if we can get them in the system, that could be as much as $4 billion coming into the state.
Well, that's quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a real need because there's a fairly substantial population of homeless vets.
Yes, there is, and it's growing.
Yeah, and I know one in particular that's had an awful difficult time finding housing. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things, too, that I would hope would get kind of addressed.
In fact, one of the programs, the state of Oregon has a document recording fee. Every time a document is recorded for building purposes, construction purposes, a portion of that fee is set aside specifically for helping homelessness and housing security among veterans. We haven't had a lot of money in that pot,
right,
but the idea is that with the lottery funds, we can help leverage those funds and private nonprofit and other services to really make a dent in trying to get folks that have earned a place to sleep in safety, a place to sleep in safety.
Well, I think everybody has earned a place to sleep.
Yes, sir.
and be safe while they do it.
Yes, sir.
Because I know that, I've talked to a fair amount of homeless people, and that's one of the things that they sometimes have a problem with is keeping their things secure. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just a matter of them staying dry because they've got their paperwork with them that they need. But I talked to this one person recently that said that, he can't watch all this stuff all the time, and somebody was stealing stuff from him.
Right.
Sleeping bags, tarps that he's going to need for the rainy season and like that. Mm-hmm. So it's just things we don't even think about.
That's right.
So Proposition 9 or ballot measure 96. I'm used to California, so I'm
Mm-hmm. Yes.
sorry.
Same.
Yeah, will help address those issues that the veterans are facing, not just homelessness, but maybe getting further education.
Right. The benefit of this particular approach, and again, ironically, it's gotten some, the folks that are opposing it for rather interesting reasons. The City Club of Portland and the Oregonian Editorial Board have argued that though the veterans' needs are real, they should be funded by general fund. And the problem with that is we've tried for 10 years to try to get general fund set aside, but when you weigh the needs of school children versus the needs of the elderly versus the needs of veterans that quite frankly should be being taken care of better by our federal VA,
Right.
we lose that fight every time. And the problem is the federal VA is not doing its job. If it was, we wouldn't really have this.
We wouldn't be having this discussion
wouldn't
now.
have this discussion. So what we tried to do was come up with a strategy that is, again, focused on leveraging and unlocking federal resources. So $18 million of lottery set aside over 2 years on top of the current ODVA budget, we think will be enough to demonstrate a clear, significant outreach effort, harvest more money coming in, and showcase how in this particular case using lottery funds may in fact be the more appropriate means than general fund. The other thing that's important is for every veteran we're able to transition into federal care, into federal services. In some cases, those folks are already on state care, so we might be freeing up state capacity. So on the one hand, we'll be bringing more federal dollars into the system. On the other hand, we should be opening up capacity so that we will, in a weird way, have our cake and eat it too. And we believe that the 1.5 set aside is a sufficient amount to be able to demonstrate clear progress, and it will unlock support and opportunities for housing, for employment, for transportation, for health care. It isn't a perfect solution, but it is, I think, the most appropriate, rational solution given our circumstances. And if nothing else, it sends a signal to the rest of the nation that Oregon is going to stand up for our veterans and use this small amount of the lottery, really 1.5%, to try and tether in as much of the federal support as possible. And if the VA doesn't get the hint that they need to start helping with that, well, I don't know what else is going to get their attention.
Well, I wouldn't know because they obviously have failed in a lot of respects.
They really have in many ways.
So you also mentioned small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, small business to me is like quite often the driving force for employment. It's not the
Absolutely.
large companies, it's the small, medium-sized ones that really do bring in a lot of jobs because they get an idea.
Mm-hmm.
They're not locked out of a lot of markets. You know, like if you're going to build a new car, you're going to be competing with Ford and Chevy, and I don't think
That's
that's going to work too well. But like these small businesses can come in. So what are we going to do to help them?
Well, it's a great question. Some people over the last several months have been trying to share the misperception that in my first term I was not listening to small businesses. And the fact of the matter is we worked a lot with small businesses. I didn't necessarily always help large businesses. Corporations can generally take care of themselves. But in terms of small businesses, as proof, we offer Senate Bill 1565, a bipartisan bill with Senator Boquist. It was designed specifically to provide rural economic opportunity. So organizations, businesses like wineries or breweries or other types of agricultural industries that want to expand their processing capability, but really have a hard time because they're living paycheck to paycheck, small business trying to make it work. We gave them an opportunity with counties that want to do this, an opportunity to waive for a certain amount of time property taxes so they can use their capital to construct their business, so that after a period of 3 to 5 years, when they have products to sell, for example, wine bottles, then they can start to repay the program. So what we've tried to do is use that as a model, and over the last 2 years, I've met with 85 different small business owners, and we've developed a small business agenda that is currently in legislative council. There are about 9 bills. They range from trying to create a tourism district to be able to provide certain types of targeted investments to help the mom and pop shops make an opportunity to be able to kind of cash in on the wine country environments. We're looking at rebates for small businesses that are disproportionately impacted by the minimum wage. I played a role in trying to make sure the minimum wage was implemented in a 6-year process as opposed to 3, and that we had multiple tiers. And the reason I was able to do that was House District 20, because we do have a lot of agriculture, because we do have really a diverse economy, I was able to make the case that, look, we do need to raise the minimum wage. It's going to make an important difference in working families' lives. But we have to do it in such a way that it doesn't cripple the small businesses that want to do the right thing. So small businesses are going to be a priority in this session as they were in past. And I'm really excited about some of the conversations we've had over the last 2 years. Sometimes it takes a while to take an idea, to do the homework, to make sure that it makes sense, to not replicate things that are already being done. And I feel very confident that the 9 pieces of legislation that we put forward will be both received well, and a couple of them, I think, should be able to make it into law.
You know, speaking of small businesses, I understand that healthcare costs are really escalating.
They are.
And so is there anything kind of that the Oregon legislature is talking about to try to help reel that in?
I think so. I think healthcare is not one of the areas that
I
am an expert in.
understand, but I hear a lot about this.
Right. No, it's important. They're in the legislature, because we have a committee process. Generally, people become more of an expert in the committees that they serve. Having said that, I am on the Business and Labor Committee, and certain aspects of how we look at healthcare providers as businesses are a part of that conversation. One of the things I think you're going to see a lot of discussion about, and perhaps even legislation on, is rethinking what the term nonprofit means, rethinking how nonprofit is in fact measured, and rethinking scale of nonprofits so that, the idea is that we have nonprofit hospitals, for example, with the idea that they could keep prices lower. They could make sure that wages of the workers in the hospital are higher because they don't have shareholders that need a profit return.
Right.
The public is, in essence, the profit return. Having said that, there are certain nonprofits around, certain hospitals across the state of Oregon that have perhaps, if not broken the spirit of the nonprofit laws, certainly bent the heck out of them in terms of what they count as write-off, what they count as community investment, and how they justify some of their prices. Now, again, I don't want to get into specifics, but I do believe that there are nonprofits that are the mom and pop nonprofits that are run on a shoestring budget to try to help people. For example, there's one in this community called Simply Birthdays that it's done by 3 or 4 volunteers. They try to make sure and show and have birthdays for kids that are really in difficult circumstances. It's the traditional, what we think of as nonprofit. There are nonprofits like the Food Bank that do great things. So I'm not trying to suggest that all nonprofits are a problem. But as we move forward and actually start taking apart the different costs, especially in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, price of drugs are certainly always going to be an issue. The price of insurance and how insurance rates people is an issue. And then, of course, the delivery of the service. And that's something that, as a member of the Business and Labor Committee, I hope to be able to play at least a small role in trying to help find a more 21st century version of looking at what nonprofit status really means.
Well, and this kind of leads to another question that I kind of see with what we're talking about, is that they're quite often, these nonprofits are putting a lot of money into various ballot measures, local ones and statewide. And to me, and sometimes they're making more profit, even though they're supposedly nonprofit, than they would if they just stayed out of it. And it kind of bothers me when I see it.
Yeah. The situation is that there's 2 real concerns that have been brought to the legislature about nonprofit behavior in the political world. The first is actually not so much playing a role in campaigns, though that is one of the concerns. But the first one is that in a very predatory approach, some nonprofits actually seek out for-profit enterprises. So, for example, if it was a hospital, they seek out for-profit clinics, buy the clinic by basically using hospital privileges to their advantage, buy the clinic, and then once they acquire the land, it remains nonprofit. and they start their own clinic and perhaps make profit a little higher than they would have otherwise because the property tax is exempt. So there are some throughout the state that have actually grown exponentially, far more than people really think about in terms of what property they own. And again, because of that, they're able to play a larger role than one would think in community politics. In terms of direct political activity, most recently, there was a measure in front of the voters in Salem and Salem-Keizer, and a certain nonprofit put money into one side of that campaign, and many people were upset because the amount of money that was put into that campaign was pretty closely mirrored to an amount that had been given to a foundation associated with that organization. Now, I don't know the specifics. I'm not really involved in the weeds on that, but I do know that the nonprofit's function in a community shouldn't really be about either forcing or navigating public will as much as providing a service. And I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to have more conversations about that in the future.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I actually, for a long time, worked for Delta Dental, which is a nonprofit. And what they did was they spun off my department, which was data processing IT, into a profit so that they could make money that way.
And again,
and sometimes that works out and sometimes it didn't, because after I left, they took it back. And
some for-profits do a great job, and God bless them if they can make a profit. Certain nonprofits, it's in an environment or a particular economic landscape or a particular service community that there's not really a way to make a profit and still deliver good service, and that's why it's there. I'm not smart enough to know who should or shouldn't be a nonprofit as much as I want to help make sure that whoever does get the protections and the subsidies of the state by being a nonprofit is actually making sure that the community service aspect is its first priority. And I think that's really, as a legislator, my responsibility.
And one of the other things that I understand you're working on is transparency in government.
Yep.
And so how is that what are you proposing? And what is that supposed to take care of?
Well, transparency in government is one of those things that it really is in the eye of the beholder. Having said that, we need to recognize that starting from scratch, Oregon is one of the most transparent governments in the country. Now, there's different studies out there these days about how transparent people are, maybe in terms of public records requests and specific pieces. But in general, Oregon actually has a pretty clean government. We have public meeting laws, we have ethics requirements, we have very clear understanding of what the rules are and aren't at the local level, at the state level, at the county level. And generally, Oregon is known for trying to be a community where we work hard to make sure that we play by the rules. Having said that, there are a number of things that we can do to become better. And several of those ideas are currently, I've put them as a request for Legislative Council for consideration 2017. I don't know if any of them will survive the first committee hearing, but a few of them are this. Number one, I think there should be a sunset clause on every bill that isn't budgetary. What that means is that there should be a minimum of 4, maximum of 10-year cycle that for a policy, for a bureaucracy to do something new, we should be forced to come together and think about whether that policy is still doing what's needed to be done, whether it's even needed, or whether it needs to be adjusted every so often. Because what happens with bureaucracies, it's almost like the family sedan, where over the X number of years where kids keep putting stickers and new other things onto it and different ads, and at the end of it, there's just a lot of stuff on there that was never originally designed. And then we blame the agency for, how come you're not more efficient? How come you're not more effective? So I think, number one, we need to have more sunset clauses on bills. And again, this whole idea of a sunset is that if it can't be proven that it's needed, then it would go away. Because ultimately, government shouldn't be in the business of perpetuating government. Government should be in the business of trying to solve problems and facilitate change. So that's one thing. Second thing is, I offered a bill last time, we're going to repeat it again this time, that during times of economic disaster, meaning $100 million or more, a deficit of $100 million or more coming into the system, that the governor, under those cases where we have $100 million more of need than supply, than funds, they would be able to declare an economic disaster, and for a certain period of time, management people, management level workers, not senior management, but the management level workers, would be or could be declared at-will employees. And what that means is that right now, under current law, management service employees are technically at will, but the HR rules are very clear that in most cases we need to have a proven demonstrated reason for dismissal, et cetera, et cetera. And my point on this is that in some bureaucracies, not all, but some, there are folks that have basically been there for a long time that make sure that progress doesn't occur very easily. And during a time of economic disaster, that's not the time to be able to allow obstacles to be there. Now, again, I don't believe this would be used very often, quite frankly. It's a power that I think in many ways may already exist, but it would provide a clearer line that if we're going to expect agencies to be able to provide services, we're going to give the management tools to be able to do that. The other thing that I want to introduce is a bill that rethinks retirement. Now, not PERS. I'm not talking about reforming PERS. That's a bigger issue than me. But for employees coming into the state of Oregon, let's just say starting in 2020, the bill would say, all right, we're going to use an example from the military, which again, the military doesn't do a whole lot right, but every now and then it does something right.
They do.
Some things right.
Yeah.
In the military, when you sign up, when you enlist, and you're able to do the job, make the grade, meet your requirements, you're generally provided a 20-year retirement if you, again, play by the rules and do what you're supposed to do. There's no expectation, however, that beyond 20 is automatic. You've got to earn that right. And in fact, in today's military, you actually, in many cases, have a situation where the commander or other folks involved have to justify anything longer than a 20-year or 25-year retirement.
You have to be critical.
You have to be critical to the mission. So what if we had a situation where public workers, we would do everything we could to make sure that if you spend your working career making Oregon stronger, being a public servant, making things good, we're going to make sure you get to your 30-year retirement. But anything beyond 30, we actually have to rethink. Instead of it being your convenience, perhaps we need to make sure that the folks that stay beyond 30 are the folks that are critical to the mission, that are critical to what we're doing. And again, what I'm talking about is not many people, but there are some people that have stayed in service for 40 years or a little bit longer, and I honor most of their efforts. They've worked very hard for the state. But if we're looking at trying to find ways to both incentivize performance and be better stewards of our money, I think that making sure that folks that stay beyond a 30-year retirement, a full retirement, are critical is a first step.
You know, one of the things you were talking about, though, is like these laws that get passed.
Mm-hmm.
And you need, I would imagine, some sort of measurement device
Mm-hmm.
to see how successful
That's right.
that was. Because it, like you're saying, it might not be doing the job that you thought it was. It might be
Right.
causing bad situations or a bad impact
Mm-hmm.
in places you hadn't thought about.
Right.
So that's kind of your analysis of what needs to be done.
That's exactly right. Right now in the state of Oregon, we have things called key performance measures. Every year, actually every 2 years, when agencies provide their budgets and they go through the process, part of the process of the first several months of the Legislative Assembly is going over those key performance measures and saying what we did right, what we didn't do right, and how it mattered. Unfortunately, if you read the state audits of these programs, a lot of those key performance measures have nothing at all to do with measuring the outcome that the bill was passed originally to do. So my argument is, government is not the problem, nor is it automatically the solution. Government is there to facilitate opportunity, to provide a safe environment, to protect our basic rights, to promote the future as we provide in the present. It is a relationship, and it is designed to be flexible, and it is designed to be, in many ways, an assistant to progress. And sometimes we put a lot of stock in, well, we're going to pass a bill and that'll solve the problem. But people are still running those bureaucracies. People are still making decisions. People still may not understand what you were trying to do with the bill, or in some cases, the bill may not have actually given them the authority to do the things you want. And what is sometimes tragic is our current political environment sometimes encourages people to come up with the next flashiest idea, and then you want to move on to the next, instead of trying to figure out what's the best way to solve the problem, bipartisan, across the board, all interests involved, implement something, and then wait a few potatoes and see if it actually is doing what it needs to do, and then constantly try to adjust and direct. Sunsets are a tool. They're not the perfect tool, but they are at least a way to say every now and then we're going to stop, freeze frame, see if it's working, and then adjust.
Well, it's kind of like what I think about professors, public or parish.
Yeah.
If you don't publish papers
Right.
that show that you're, real knowledgeable about this, well, the thing is, it takes away from your classroom time. And so now we're not getting the full benefit of that. And that sounds a little bit about what you're talking about, is that what is the real measurement needed for determining whether this has been a successful program or not for our needs?
Right. Absolutely true. And I'll give you an example. The Department of Human Services, right? DHS. DHS is a huge organization. And it truly is the organization that exists to try to do all the things that we as a society want to get done, but don't always know how. If in doubt, we could pass a bill and throw it up to DHS and hope that it'll work. And in many ways, I have been a very vocal critic of current leadership in terms of decision-making at DHS, but I've also been very clear that you don't hobble somebody and then blame them for not winning a marathon, right? Like, let's at least give people the tools. So, my approach to DHS reform, my approach to government in general is, first question is the system and structure, are they appropriate to the task at hand? Second, if they are, all right, are the expectations realistic? Third piece is, before we add anything else on, is the agency we're talking about the most appropriate, or is it just the most convenient? And that's also, sometimes in politics, you may not be able to get the answer you want in terms of getting the votes for that, but you might be able to slide it in somewhere through a budget note or through something else. And again, I don't believe that we can untangle the nest in one day, but I do believe that the true measure of leadership, the true measure of experience, the true measure of a good legislator is, yes, having some good ideas, and yes, being able to provide a voice for the concerns of your constituents, but it's also to be able to look at a problem and be able to figure out what kinds of interests need to be involved in figuring out a long-term solution to that problem, and then making sure that along the way there are these snapshot measurements so that at least you're going in the right direction. And sometimes it's that non-sexy work that is, I think, the most important, but again, in modern politics, it's not really the thing that most people pay attention to.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for coming in. We've run out of time, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll have to see you next time on the Valley View.
Thank you very much.